I started out back in 2014 as while I was still in school, like as a BDR full time for very organically, we kind of spun off a recruiting firm. I hit quota at 0 of my sales jobs. At Talin, I've closed 10 times more business than I've ever closed in ever working a sales job. It took me reading and studying thousands of pieces of content from some amazing copywriters. Recruiter doesn't have time to do that. You have to invest in new technology or you will be made redundant.
Welcome to the Kickstart Podcast. On this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting Julian, who has an impressive career working in different types of roles, from product management to business development to franchise owners to head of growth positions at fast-growing companies. Today, he is the co-founder and CEO of Talin, an AI-powered talent acquisition platform for staffing and recruitment teams. Julian, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Preston and Ryan. I appreciate it, guys, and it's really good to be here.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. For those who are unfamiliar with your background, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in and around startups, pretty much my entire career. Actually, like before I even graduated university. I started out back in 2014 as while I was still in school, like as a BDR full time for a really early stage startup. Actually, in the space that I'm currently in. We're out of the digital media zone, DMZ, here in Toronto, which is one of the biggest, or I think the biggest incubator based here in Canada. And yeah, I've started as a BDR for a company sort of in this space, went on to eventually kind of transition into growth marketing as a demand gen type person, working on those early kind of growth systems within mostly kind of venture-backed SaaS companies. And yeah, got to the point where, I was consulting for a few different tech companies on, everything from product to growth in a pretty holistic way. And a lot of people ask, they go, okay, how do you go from that to building a company in recruiter tech, in rec tech? How do you make that jump? Like, you were not a recruiter. And basically what happened was, while I was doing some of that consulting, a number of clients that I had very organically just asked me to start to help build out their early growth teams. Hey, we need a head of growth, we need a VP of sales, we need a head of marketing, etc. And I basically got struck deals with those companies to make placements for them on contingency, as part of my, external consultancy. And very organically, we kind of spun off a recruiting firm as like an arm to our consultancy. And now we had this nice little niche where, we were making placements for a few different YC companies. That was kind of that was part of the core of some of the consulting that I was doing. And not only did we find some success in it early on, but we quickly realized that our background in growth applied itself extremely well to recruiting. And we started figuring out all the pieces of that recruitment workflow that could be automated. And before we knew it, we kind of had this really interesting set of tools that were strung together via API and SQL and just these various kind of pieces of tech that we had strung together. And we said, hey, there's not a lot of products that can do what we have built internally that's designed for a recruiting agency, which is kind of what we had become. And that was really that was the inspiration for starting Talin. We took that really early set of kind of APIs and things that we'd strung together, and we slowly built out a full-fledged platform and bootstrapped since 2021. We've been building out kind of the product and got to the point where we were able to raise some financing, and we raised our pre-seed round in October of last year.
That's awesome. So you kind of almost fell into recruiting. It happened organically, and the saying, everything happens for a reason, right? I think when we talk to a lot of founders, Julian, a lot of them say, hey, ideally, if I was able to do X, Y, Z, we're able to kind of really curate a list. And a lot of those, like previous sales experience, definitely helpful. Previous growth marketing or any digital marketing experience, very helpful. Previous, like even product experience, very helpful. The fact that you've done like all three, I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know if you've always planned on starting like another business down the line, really kind of help you create like an awesome foundation to be able to leverage to just, catapult Talin into success. So my question to you is, was this always the plan for you to start another business? Have you always been entrepreneurial? Like, how did you just, even taking a step back, like get into tech BDR? Is that something you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, since I was like a kid, since I was like 15, 16 years old, I had some kind of, little side hustle going on. From, when I was 16, I started like a t-shirt printing company back when, but before there was Printly, you know what I mean? And you could basically throw a design on a t-shirt on your computer and get it ordered to you. I had screen printers in my garage, basically making t-shirts. I had an event marketing company where I threw like parties on ships, that like small kind of cruise ships that I had like rented out for. I was still in high school at the time. Do you know what I mean? So then I did like a college pro painter franchise, my first year university. So like I was just obsessed with the concept of just like seeing an opportunity and then trying to build something around leveraging the opportunity. And just by pure fluke, I kind of stumbled into a career fair one day in this space that I'm in right now at the DMZ, because I went to university at the time it was called Ryerson University here in Toronto. And yeah, basically just very happenstance, like met some founders here and they pitched me on coming to join their company as a BDR. And from that moment on, the combination of this, that entrepreneurial, kind of spirit that is required, I think, for, a startup to do well and to thrive in that environment, that combined with just how fascinated I was with how differently a startup operated and just like leveraging technology and the new technologies that were coming out, right? This is like mid 2010s when, cloud computing was kind of at the forefront. It was only a few years old. Software, moving onto the cloud, and Google Drive for the first time was getting adopted widely. So like a lot of startups had, tech or like applications in different areas. Right now we're in a whole different paradigm, but that whole world fascinated me. And I knew like startups were such an awesome combo for me to be able to, be really creative, get to, be exposed to technology and be an entrepreneur kind of at the same time. And I think throughout, going from kind of BDR to eventually like a kind of a more senior kind of growth person, starting a startup was always in the back of my head. That's something that I think had always kind of been there. And just as I got more mature, a couple things clicked for me until I ended up seeing the problem that I eventually wanted to go solve. I quickly figured out, I think someone with a growth background, it's a pretty excellent skill set to be a founder. There's just so many pieces in there that are so unbelievably invaluable when you're in the early days of starting a company, of just being scrappy, figuring out how to automate things, figuring out how to scale things. I always knew that would come in handy big time. So given that whole backstory, this kind of, this idea I had in the back of my head that this is something I'd really like to do. And then this problem kind of made it just essentially organically kind of popped up in front of me in a market in staffing and recruiting where I feel, especially at the time, I felt like was being ignored, frankly, by like a lot of tech, and a lot of solutions were not being built for this market, but rather, ZoomInfo, wants to package a product, call it ZoomInfo Recruit, and then bang, just sell it into the market. But they don't know, they are not agency recruiters, right? They don't really understand the market. I thought that this was an amazing opportunity to solve a compelling problem in an under invested in space, and it was a lining up of the planets. So happened super organically. And yeah, I think a lot of things kind of clicked at the same time.
For the audience who are unfamiliar with what growth marketing is and even product management, can you just quickly define that in your words?
Yeah, absolutely. So a growth marketer is, think of another way I like to call it, almost like revenue-based marketing, which essentially is the idea that, hey, all of my inputs in marketing, which could be a lot of things, right? It could be running ads online. It could be building like content. It could be optimizing like a website or like a landing page to convert visitors into free trial users. There's a lot of different activities or things that it could be, generally related to, in and around sort of digital marketing, but with the goal in mind of having a very predictable and ideally scalable system around your inputs and outputs. So knowing if I spend X amount of dollars or time into a specific marketing activity, how much does my company grow? How many users do we sign from that? How much more money do we make? How many more deals do we sign? So it's really that the term growth marketer was really only coined again in around kind of the early 2010s. So it's, about a decade and a half old in terms of as a really a career or a way of doing things. And, really pioneered by like technology companies. And now it's starting to, given that, digital marketing is now just kind of marketing, right? There's not a lot of distinction anymore between what's digital and what's not. So this concept of being a growth marketer is now, bleeding into every single industry. It's no longer, I think, going to be just a specific tech industry thing. It can be applied into any industry. And I think recruiting is kind of, to me, was no different.
And what about product management, Julian?
Yeah. So I was never, in terms of product product management, I eventually, as I became more holistic as a growth marketer, I was doing less like, hey, like I can, run your ad campaign on Google Ads. So more like looking holistically at an entire kind of growth engine, if you will. And you have to look at a product as well to be able to do that, right? So, hey, is your product set up to bring users down a journey from a digital perspective to move them down the pipeline or move them down the funnel, right? To get them from top of funnels to like, hey, mid funnel to booking a demo or to, getting deeper and more interested in the product or product activation, right? Getting them to actually use the product or hit certain North Star metrics within the product, things like that.
For sure. Yeah. The only reason why I ask is because a lot of people say, especially in tech, right? Obviously sales, but product and digital marketing or growth specifically is really, really important. So especially in tech, if you're building a software or SaaS company, so much of the focus is on the technical aspects, right? So like engineering, product, that's very, very important. But by focusing too overtly on that, you're just ignoring the second half, which is how do you actually get eyeballs onto your product, right? So I don't know if you know that the meme or the phrase, Julian, where someone's like, hey, a first-time founder focuses on the product, a second-time founder focuses on go-to-market, right? Yeah. Like it doesn't matter if you make the best product in the world. If you can't get sales, if you can't get traffic to it, it's just not going to get anywhere. And so if you were to choose between your growth marketing and product and BDR, what was, before we kind of dive more into like the recruiting topics, just for people who are entrepreneur, people who are listening in, they're more tech or SaaS space, what would you say was like the single one most impactful career that you've done before that kind of hit the needle for you and helping you kind of increase the probability of success for a brand new kind of software startup?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think just kind of in being a growth marketer, you indirectly need to have a very strong understanding of product. And I think that's actually what separates kind of a growth marketer from someone who's just like in digital marketing, right? Or just runs ads or just does like SEO or something. A growth marketer needs to understand, hey, once I've gotten the person the eyeballs and I've even gotten them to a website or gotten them to sign up for a trial or sign up for a demo, right? Where does that journey continue? And how far down the pipe can I get them until I, let's say, hand them off to a salesperson? And so being a growth marketer just kind of forced this sort of like holistic view of the entire thing, which, to me was just, invaluable, because if you can essentially do everything from, hey, I need to generate the attention, I need the attention to then take a specific action. And then ideally, even before I get them into a sales engagement or get them into a sales call or demo or whatever it is, if I can get them to a point where they're in the product, using the product, and have been able to get them to a time to value, right? Have been able to get them to a point where they're seeing value in the product. Being able to do that whole piece is kind of what a growth marketer needs to do. And learning to kind of do that was massive. I see some founders that maybe don't have that background, or even ones that just have a tech background and don't have like marketing and product. And it's hard for me to imagine how we would have been able to get here kind of without that. Hey, there's a lot of ways to make it happen, but I just know for us leveraging that was essential. So
and so I think just from that there, but also from everything we've been chatting about, like that growth background gave you such a leg up to take advantage of the opportunity to found Talin when you saw, okay, this is a problem in the market that I want to address. And so from your background, it seems like you had all of the building blocks building up. You had some of that sales background, some of the marketing, some of the product, to where you're like, okay, now this is my opportunity, I'm going to shoot, right? But a lot of folks, and in the audience that we talk to, they say, okay, I know I want to start a company in the future, or maybe I want to start a company now, right? So if you were talking to someone who said, okay, I want to start a company, maybe they're on the younger side, maybe still in college or early career, would you say, yeah, go for it now? If you see an idea, go? Or would you say, maybe get a couple of years in some product background or some marketing background and sales background and then go? Like, what's your kind of take on the right timing for a situation like that?
I mean, like, let's put it this way. This is my first startup, and we've gotten to a point where, I think 85-90% of startups don't get to. And the only reason I think we got here is because both me and my co-founder / CTO have been in startups our entire career as early employees at startups. So I think if you are, let's say you're out of school, you're 22, 23, 24, and you're thinking of starting a startup, I think you need to have some self-awareness on like what you don't know and really make a careful decision. Like, hey, I could go work for a startup, learn from other people's mistakes, also learn what they do well, right? And then use that data to later on, build my own company. In terms of your first time, like you in situation A versus B, there's no way that you will be as successful as compared to you with that experience in an early stage startup. Now, could you make the argument and say, hey, like, as long as you're 100% okay with failing and investing a 2-3 years into a startup and having it not work out, and then you're just cool, I'm going to use that, and that's going to be data for like my second startup. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you could do that. I just think, I would bias toward working with the smartest people possible. And if you can work with some brilliant folks at an early stage startup and get paid to do it, I think most people don't have the safety net to just be able to say, hey, I'm just going to like not get paid for a couple of years outside of university. And, I saved up 6 figures in savings before I started my startup. And that was essential to being able to survive until we were able to pay ourselves salaries, right? So there's so many things there in that calculation. I think 9 times out of 10, honestly, go work in a startup. That's my bias. So
people are too driven by the fantasy of it. What you see on social media or, TV shows or movies and stuff. And they're like, oh, startup's so easy. And then the easiest way to get like a taste of that life is to get a job at one. So I totally agree with Julian. Just like experience it, because you might be like, I hate startups. Why do I want to start one? Right? Or like, I can't do this scrappy 24/7 lifestyle, work hard, break stuff fast. And then it's not for me. So I think like starting a business 100%. Is a big decision, right, Julian? And like, it should be taken with a level of seriousness as any big decisions in your life, whether it's getting married, having a kid, buying a house. But, in a country, especially North America like us, where it's just so glorified, we're a hyper-capitalistic society where we really look up to people who are owning businesses. Everyone thinks that they should own businesses, but some people actually would probably make a better chief of staff, a head of a director of operations, and crush it in their career than actually starting their own company. And so again, I'm all for people having experiences in life, but just like taking the action, but also just not being stupid. Like, don't be reckless with life, be smart, dip your toes in. And so I think that's valid. Now, going back to kind of, sorry, did you want to?
I was gonna say, I just want to double down on that. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think like what's really important to realize is the majority of people don't have a personality that fits well to being like a startup founder. It's a really particular set of things that kind of drive you. And just like, I'll give you like a really good example of something that I do well, that a lot of people I know typically, and trust me, there's a lot of things that I do really poorly that make me bad at other things or other types of careers that I was not good in. But one of the things I'm really good at, and my fiance she articulated this to me really well. She goes, you are extremely adept at basically what she calls like plate spinning, being able to have 4, 5, or 6 things going on, all of which are uncertain, ambiguous, high risk. And at any point, any of the plates could fall. And some of the plates like will fall, undoubtedly. But when a plate does fall, you're kind of unfazed, and you just have this ability to keep all the other plates going. And you can kind of compartmentalize right between the plates spinning, and be able to really like maintain focus, like where you need it, when you need it, and keep that whole thing kind of going. A lot of people, and I've realized this with working with different types of people, a lot of people that would cause them like crippling anxiety to do that. If that is you, in terms of that situation makes you uncomfortable, you cannot be a startup founder. I don't think it's possible, but it's like, what does that mean? Does that mean you're not as good? No, absolutely not. We're all wired differently, right? Like that same person who, like, I'll give you an example. If you gave me, I was a really bad salesperson early on. I was awful. I hit quota at 0 of my sales jobs. At Talin, I've closed 10 times more business than I've ever closed in ever working a sales job. And the reason for that is those sales jobs were mainly comprised of, hey, we've, here's the manual, right? We've written out the playbook for you. Rinse and repeat this on a daily basis. And I was so bad at that. I could not. Maybe it's the ADD. I don't know, but I just couldn't. I wasn't able to execute and perform at a high level when sort of given instructions. I needed kind of the ambiguity to kind of do it well. And the world would not function if there weren't people who could basically execute at a high level when being given a specific objective, or at least a specific set of instructions to kind of get there. That's really, really important. So it's knowing yourself is a big part of it. And it might make sense to invest the time to get to know yourself a little better before you make such a big decision, to your point.
Now, it goes back to another question, Julian. Are founders born, or the skills that you have now that ended up being really helpful and beneficial to Talin, were they developed, right? So a lot of people, you can before like working, you could be really, really crappy in sales, but then after a string of sales jobs, you can end up just really building that tough skin, okay with rejection and failure, and end up being like really, really good at it. So do you think that good founders can develop those traits if they're lacking it, if they're extremely self-aware, or do you think a lot of it is just innate?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the traits are developed. Absolutely. I just think they are developed pretty early in life. Like I'll give you a really good one. You got to kind of be a little bit out to lunch, I think, to be a founder. And what I mean by that is I think you have to have a little bit of delusional confidence. You know what I mean? Most people, you lay out the steps of like roughly what needs to happen for your startup to be successful. And most people look at that with a seed of doubt. As a founder, you kind of need to look at that and be like, yeah, I can do that. Like, which is probably, and statistically is 90% incorrect of the time. Yep. But it's only the people who are delusionally confident who find a way to actually get it done. Because if there's any kind of, and not that you're not going to have doubts along the journey, you wake up so many, and I'm sure you guys have had this too. You wake up some days being like, what the hell am I doing? That's part of it. But you got to have, that's a trait, that kind of delusional. I owe a lot of, it's my parents. I give them a ton of credit for giving me that trait, because I grew up in a house where you are kind of told, and I'm really thankful for this, right? You were kind of told you could do whatever you want. If you care enough about it and you work enough at it, it goes, you're in full control. I was never told you can't do something because you're not able to. And so, for better or worse, I was given this kind of this pretty crazy amount of confidence, you know what I mean, growing up. But then it became for me a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to apply that confidence, like you can do things as long as you're not, expecting for things to happen without putting work into it, obviously, right? That's where you have to balance that with a lot of hard work. And once you get in the real world, you get humbled real quick. So yeah, I think all those things can be developed. I just know for me, those core pieces happened to me like pretty young. So
for me, Julian, I was raised the exact same way. My mom literally said, you can do whatever you want. And I think telling that to a kid who's developing, his brain's developed, that's a blessing and a curse. Like that literally like unlocked a different level of my brain, but it can easily be a curse, because like with me, I don't feel risk. Like I'm right, like you and like founders our risk tolerance is very different. Like when I gauge opportunities, I see them as a small opportunity or a big opportunity, when everyone would be like, big risk, low risk, like I'm freaking out. And because of that, like I take chances. But I think one of my favorite quotes is like, founders are just wired differently. It doesn't mean that they're better. They're just wired differently. And because of that just allows them to, not to generalize, not all people with these traits end up being successful founders, but a lot of these people who have these traits can help them get past like a lot of the first 60, 90, like 1 year of emotional, psychological turmoil that many people without these experiences would just easily fold. You know what I mean? So before getting into recruiting, I would just want to ask you, so, for me, I was talking to one guy and he's like, a founder in our society has such like a positive connotation, like, oh man, status, I feel good. But he's like, another way to look at founders is just kind of, a founder to him is like someone who can eat pieces of glass every day for a long period of time, and someone who can experience just unimaginable amount of stress and manage it, and yet still take action every day while eating glass at the same time. And he's like, if you're able to just think of founders like that, most people who are like, I can be a great founder, 8 out of 10 will be like, nope, never mind, I changed my mind, right? So like, I'm curious to you, like, how would you consider your risk emotional tolerance baseline is? Like, how do you handle stress on a day-to-day, week by week? Does it compute, or does it just like go over your head, doesn't even compute?
Yeah, totally. Like, I think, and it's funny because I'm actually, in some ways, I'm the type of person to get stressed by like little things that are like annoyances, but like a huge monumental bad thing could happen and I'm just like cool as a cucumber. Do you know what I mean? So I won't go into the psychological reasons as to why that, dichotomy exists, but it's, I think one thing that I've gotten good at is really training my brain to not care about the things that are out of my control in the business, because emotional exertion on you didn't close like a really big deal that would have been a huge deal to the company, but you put everything into the deal. Any mistakes you made were honest mistakes, or like not something you could have really foreseen or necessarily done better with the information you had at the time. Like I kind of do those kind of calculations in my head pretty quickly, and I find I don't really get worked up over things that I just feel like I go, you know what, let me try to learn from it. my best course of action is to move to the next thing as quickly as possible. I think that's a core thing for managing stress. If you just get super stressed out when bad things happen to you that aren't really in your control, I find what I need to improve on is when someone else does something that, has an adverse effect on me, or, like there's things that I maybe for whatever reason I feel like I was in control of that I screwed up. Like that causes, I think, a lot of stress because there's that element of, some regret and some just wish you had kind of done better. But yeah, everyone needs their own, if you're going to do this job or any version of it, you need strategies for being able to, like you said, chew the glass every day, just continue to perform. Bad things will happen to you on an almost daily basis. And I can name any type of bad thing you could possibly imagine. And it's happened to us at some point in the business, but you find a way to just, you keep kind of going. Yeah, and then really good things happen too, right? And that's the balance.
Yeah, so. You still show up. And just to kind of add one more point to this, I remember listening to a podcast with a renowned VC, and he's like, the best leaders and the best founders from his experience are those that when it feels like the world is ending, right? Armageddon's happening. They come to the meeting or conversation cool as a cucumber, as if nothing was happening. And they bring solutions to how they're able to solve the world ending problem that's happening day to day, right?
Yeah.
And just exactly like what you shared with me literally is an example of that. Like the world, your business could be ending or feels like ending today, but you just got to remain cool and even headed and be like, hey, let's problem solve. How do we get out of this? And let's keep moving forward. So I appreciate you giving an inner glimpse of kind of who you are, Julian, how you think. I think it's very fascinating. We can easily just talk about this for hours. Now, going into more recruiting, 2 questions to kick this off. So number one, you said something about ZoomInfo, which I thought was very interesting. You said, organically, I saw a product like ZoomInfo exists. I saw a market that was very underserved. And we decided, maybe this could be a good product for this market. So why do you think that a lot of the tech recently, right, or historically have been a lot more corporate internal teams heavy, less agencies? And where do you see kind of the trend going? Because, the agency segment industry is huge, the third party. And it's very easy for people to immediately just focus on internal corporate and TA teams. And a lot of the ATSs and the OG softwares have been very, very biased there.
Yeah.
So why do you think that was? Where do you see the industry going? And what are you most excited about in the third party space?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question. And that's kind of something we asked like early on as well. We go like, why is there this just big kind of gap in the space? There was like a few tools obviously that were out there, but what we wanted to build, it was very, very little that we saw out there that looked kind of compelling and almost nothing that I would have considered, let's call it A tier software. I said at best, there's a B tier option in the space, but mostly C and D tier kind of software option. I go, why is that? And we've learned like a couple of things. So one is just like on the straight up, like, where do VC dollars go? They go to historically, and this is changing, but historically VC dollars funnel into companies that can prove, $1 billion plus exits or a 50 or 100x, outcome for their investors, right? And internal TA is really easy to prove that out. Now that space is kind of oversaturated as a result, but in the 2010s and, especially during COVID, kind of when VC dollars were sort of falling from the sky, those internal TA teams, like Gem, for example, like they raised crazy amount of money, most of which never were able to kind of grow into the valuations that they raised at. But the internal TA market it's bigger. Even though the agency market, I agree with you, it's a big market. The internal TA team is, several times larger just in terms of just number of recruiters that are internal versus external. So it was just easier for VC dollars to find their way there. And so more tech got developed there. So that's reason one. The other reason is I think we're in an interesting time now because we're finding buyers are now more eager. Even 3 or 4 years ago when we were just starting out, it was harder to sell. I think that agency recruiters were less inclined or less eager to adopt like new technology. Like you had a lot of folks who were really set in their ways. Hey, I've been recruiting since the 90s and we did it this way. I adopted LinkedIn Recruiter, but like that's kind of where it ends. I don't really need anything else. I've been successful my whole career, blah, blah, blah. And now all of a sudden they are seeing quite literally AI agents that can go and source a list of candidates. That's pretty good. It's not, maybe perfect yet, but the rate at which it's gotten good. I think this, kind of the AI revolution, if you will, has kind of kicked a lot of recruiters, the pants a little bit to be like, hey, like you have to invest in new technology or you will be made redundant. So I think there's a big renewed kind of eagerness for them. So I think the timing now is better to be selling into agency tech, whereas a few years ago, I think it was really tough. I know personally of a ton of companies who tried to sell into agencies and failed and pivoted their company to then sell into internal TA. So far, we haven't felt the need to kind of become one of those companies. But yeah, I think those are a couple of really interesting factors, both of which now I think are changing. So
I definitely see the change in the winds happening. Also, I think VCs are just more excited investing into more products versus like service/agency companies, right? I think a lot of it is tied to like the potential valuation, just historically. You get all the big ones through mainly SaaS and software, but I am optimistic and positive that like some VCs are opening up their eyes and like, you know what, this space has potential, right? And again, what you guys have done, being able to raise around is just a kind of testament to that, which is exciting. So in 2025, where do you see most of the recruiters really struggling? So if someone had a career or someone had a side hustle or someone's a solo recruiter or they run an agency, what is the biggest pain point that you're seeing with a lot of recruiters now in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just their ability to do BD, honestly. We just see it like time and time again. Generally speaking, most recruiters are trained in some way or another on how to source, reach out to candidates, build pipeline for candidates, run an interview process, that the whole nine on the candidate side. I think on the BD side, the kind of old adage is like, leverage your network, right? But that doesn't work. In a down market, that does not work. Your network is extremely finite. And yeah, basically you essentially, you start to quickly run out of pipeline if you're just going to search through your network. So it's coming up with scalable, repeatable ways to generate business. And it's just like to not only like build those systems, but even like fundamentals around like good BD and all the nuance and all the pieces that kind of come with it, that I think in a really good hot market like 2020, 2019, you could get away with not having that. And I think right now there's a really rude awakening where I'm seeing recruiting firms that have invested in the systems are doing better than ever. And the ones that haven't are either laying people off or going out of business. So
I agree. I think like recruiting is also fundamentally a sales role. And so it's kind of funny that a lot of people learn recruiting without actual, I guess, the closest sales is like reaching out to candidates, talking to them. But real sales also, a huge chunk of it is BD, lead generation, reaching out to cold markets on the client side. And so a lot of corporate recruiters who are making that switch to solo, that's where they struggle the most. And I agree with you when it comes to BD, so much has happened so quickly, very recently, right? So in 2020s or even before that, you wouldn't really need to be officially properly trained on sales or lead gen to pick up clients. But like now what me and what Ryan, what we're seeing now is that you just gotta be dialed in. You gotta almost do everything perfectly. If not leveraging systems, like everything has to be perfect, but you gotta really master those nuances, the channels, the follow-ups, the call to actions. And then of course, being able to just add systems and technology on top of that so that you can really scale, create that infrastructure. It just quickly becomes super, super technical for the normal person now than what originally was needed or required way back when. So I feel like more has changed in recruitment in the past several years, specifically with the expectations and requirements of BD than in the last like 10, 20 years. Because we also talked, Julian, with a lot of people, and they're like, I would ask them, what's been like your main source of BD? They're like, my network. I'm like, are you kidding me? You can just get through that in a day. What are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do this week? What if you're in a down market, right? So I guess that's a good segue into Talin because, there's a clear pain here that a lot of recruiters are experiencing. But was that pain too obvious and big for you guys to be like, hey, we need to pursue this? Or like, why? I know that you said that you kind of organically fell into like becoming like an ad hoc contingency recruiting firm. Why are you stopping that? Are you still doing that? Why not have just continued and scale that and not pursue like this whole, the tech systematizing BD platform that you're creating with Talin? Or are you doing a little bit of both? Like, what was your thought process there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've since kind of dialed back most of the like recruiting and stuff like that we're doing. Sometimes we'll take on the odd role really for the purpose of dog fooding our own product and making sure we never stray too far from the shoes of our user, right? So that's, if we do that, it's not for cash flow reasons, it's for, R&D reasons. And that said, the product also just got to a level of maturity and revenue where we didn't like have to do that anymore. So that was part of it. But yeah, I think I'm pretty passionate now about the sort of the problem I call arming the rebels. I think a lot of people are speculating, hey, is there a world in the future where recruiting agencies are redundant? Don't need them anymore. Internal TA teams are going to have these AI agents that are going to automate the whole thing and we'll be able to fill pipeline and da-da-da. I don't buy that. And I think, I don't want to say most people, I think a good chunk of people also, kind of don't buy that because I think agencies will have access to this exact same technology, right? That internal TA teams do. They're not biased, right? They're not going to to be forced to recruit for one brand. They are going to be able to recruit for, the company that's the best fit for the candidate. And so because of that, I think you're going to see a really interesting dynamic shift in kind of recruiting agencies. I think we can get into this maybe more after. I think eventually in a world where, we can basically automate any work you do at your computer, we can virtually automate to it almost like an infinite level. Not that we're there today, but it's like a when, not if, right? In that world, I think the relationship the recruiter has with the candidate and their ability to, shop a candidate around or be able to get open doors for that candidate as opposed to the company just going to the candidate directly. I think that dynamic is going to have a ton of value, and you have to be an external hiring partner to have that dynamic. Think of it as like a player, an agent to a professional athlete, right? I think that model, the distant future of recruiting, I think that will happen, and that's the future we're kind of building for. So that's an arm the rebels strategy. Someone's got to build something to kind of enable recruiters to still continue to have their own businesses. Otherwise, they all just become cogs in the wheel of corporate, which a lot of people don't want to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think like you really hit the nail on the head there with, this is not going to eradicate recruiters, right? And it's just going to make them even better, make them more powerful as, talent partners. But kind of going back to that kind of automation piece of, these AI programs can't just do everything that we can do. That is still a question we get all the time from, especially agency recruiters or folks who maybe aren't in recruiting, think it's easy. They're like, oh, I can do this. They say, I want an AI tool to automate my sourcing, my outreach, my candidate calls, my submittals, my sales calls, like every single step of the way. And Julian, we're in the same mindset of you as like, there's nothing out there right now or really in the foreseeable future that's going to do all of that, right? So then my question in your mind is like, where is that balance for if I'm a recruiter, I want to be super cutting edge of the tech industry. I want to be using AI to make me most efficient. Where is the line between, okay, AI can handle this and myself as a human can handle this? Like, where's the right sweet spot, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like, it really comes down to, when you look at there's a couple things, right? I think when you look at your workflow, it's understanding two things. One is like what within your workflow, like what are you most eager to automate and where's the biggest bottleneck in your business? That's a really good place to start your research. Then you need to pair with that. Where's the technology itself currently at in terms of its ability to automate that piece of the equation? And like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you want AI to automate your intake interviews, your initial sort of screening call. There's a ton of tools right now that are being released to do that. It's probably worth your time to test out a few to see if there's any that would pass your litmus test of doing so. Generally speaking, there's two kind of areas you want AI to be in. And depending on where in your workflow you're applying it, you need to be really careful of which of these two buckets you use as your framework. One is I'm going to use AI to get me 70, 80% of the way there, and then I'm going to polish up the final product, right? That's most AI right now. Majority of it lives there. And most of what we have built does that. And I think right now that's probably the better way to do it. The second arena, which is where we're headed, but I don't think we're there yet in a lot of places, but in some, you could argue that we are. AI, the output that AI gives me is as good or better than what I can do. Therefore, I want AI to fully take over this piece of the process that I'm choosing to implement AI. So right now, we're one of the things we're working on right now is like a template generator for email, LinkedIn messages, SMS, like basically where you would in Talin, right? You can build out campaigns, multi-channel with automated follow-ups, things like that. So we're releasing this AI template generator, and it's actually probably in the arena of if you're like a mid-level, let's say an intermediate level recruiter, it's probably doing as good or better than that recruiter. That's kind of what the early testing has shown us in terms of that initial message. And now you may want to throw your own tone over it, make it more you, totally, like you can do it that way. That's sort of that arena where, it can do that. AI sourcing, for example, I haven't seen any evidence of anything on the AI sourcing front that can build a list as good as you can. Now, we have an AI sourcing tool as well. It works over top of LinkedIn Recruiter. It's great to basically say, I'm going to build 80%. I'm going to build a list that's 80% good. And so I'm going to save my first 30, 40 minutes of sourcing by doing this. And now I'm going to go in and massage the list and vet it and spend some time really getting it from 80 to 100. That's the mindset I think you got to really look at AI. And I think there's too many people, to your point, there's too many people that don't fully understand how it works. And so they're hoping to see this thing that doesn't exist that automates all the things that you kind of mentioned earlier, which is just, I would argue if that's your mindset, like you just need to learn more about AI, where it's at today, how it works, etc. You know what I mean? So
now that we're kind of talking about AI, automation, recruiting and stuff like that, just one more time, Julian, in your words, can you explain to the audience, what does Talin do as a company? what are some of your core features and functions that you and your team are proud of?
Yeah, absolutely. So Talin is a top of funnel automation platform designed to help staffing and recruiting agencies scale how they engage both candidates as well as attract new clients, going everywhere from I need to identify who to reach out to getting my initial screening call or my initial sales call booked. So think everything that you would do, before getting getting either candidates or clients into your ATS or CRM, that full top of funnel kind of experience, from list building to enriching lists with data around LinkedIn profile data, contact information, etc., to deploying multi-channel outbound kind of messages to handling, incoming responses from candidates or clients.
And what makes you what makes you guys different to other services out there, similar ones?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think because we are designed for staffing and recruiting agencies, we're a 360 platform, right? So we have the agency experience in mind of recruiters that are working on both sales campaigns as well as candidate outreach campaigns. So, a lot of our AI features have different models built out for context around I'm reaching out to a candidate versus reaching out to a potential client, And some of our AI features that are really interesting is, being able to upload a job description or a resume and automatically generate a list of hiring managers based on the candidate's resume, who would be a good hiring manager for that candidate, or be able to, source a list of candidates based on that job description. That could be done right over top of LinkedIn Recruiter. Then being able to draft an email out to all of them and then personalize that email using details from their LinkedIn profile or maybe other company data, from those individuals. And, being able to do that over not just email, but LinkedIn, InMail, SMS, phone calls, the whole nine, totally integrated with your ATS, and a lot of the ATSs that are used by agencies where there's not a lot of integrations for, right? Create, Recruiter Flow, Recruit CRM, Bullhorn, Loxo, we integrate with all of those kind of core ATSs.
Gotcha. What's powering your AI on the back end?
Yeah, so we use a number of the large language models that are out there. We don't really limit ourselves to one. And basically we take these base kind of large language models and we train them, right? Using a mix of our own expertise as well as the expertise of, expert recruiters that we'll bring in, specifically for the purpose of kind of training the AI. And so the goal, we've got a number of different models and prompts and things like that we'll use. And I think what's really nice about Talin is it doesn't require any expertise with AI. It's quite literally, hey, click this button to get this outcome. And it's, again, the beauty of being niche is that we can be really prescriptive and generally know what good looks like for staffing and recruiting. And so the outcome, most recruiters are pretty happy with how it operates, and they don't need to do a whole lot of configuration to make it work for them.
So on the client acquisition side, your Talin helps with multiple channels, right? So you referenced LinkedIn messaging, cold emailing, etc. How important is it for the average recruiter to use multiple channels with respect to client acquisition versus someone who just wants to stay in one channel and really master that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you go, and we have just a lot of data to support this, right? But by going multi-channel, you generally speaking are going to increase your average kind of reply rate, for a given campaign. A big reason for that is different, whether it's candidates or prospects, really works for both, right? Various individuals have certain bias to spend more time or be more likely to respond to different channels. I know people personally who will not respond to an email. They simply will not. And then I have other people who would never respond to a cold email. And then there's people who are the complete flip, right? The complete opposite. It's essentially another at-bat, right? To try to engage with a prospect, or a candidate. And if you're able to create a really cohesive journey of communication, right? Not just, hey, following up, right? But actually offer some new insight, some new value kind of in each touch point across different channels. That's how you go from a 4% reply rate to an 8% reply rate. Or if you're talking about candidates, how you go from a 12% to a 30% reply rate. So it's really just about, being able to get the most out of all that time you spent building a high quality list, being able to generate more out of it.
So if someone was listening in right now and they're just starting out, or maybe they're experiencing a lot of obstacles, a lot of headwinds when it comes to candidate clients, do you have a top 1, top 2 tip, most common mistakes that you see people do when it comes to client acquisition and candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of it's was the motivation, behind us building this kind of template, this AI copy coach, if you will, this template generator that's coming out. A lot of recruiters are not phenomenal copywriters, and there's just a lot of basic mistakes they make in their outreach. I'll give you a couple of examples. If I say, hi Preston, hope you're well, immediately that's not something you want to be doing, is starting off with this sort of, or sorry for bothering you, right? This kind of initial bluff line that does nothing for you, and immediately signals to the recipient that it's cold outreach or a cold email. Just knowing things like that, best practices like that is really, really important. Another really good one is don't use assumptive language. We have a lot of data that shows assumptive language in cold outreach doesn't work well. So if you say, hey, I found the perfect client for you, guess what I'm thinking? Oh, how do you know? You've seen my website and we've never talked before. How do you know they're perfect for us? You do not have, the context to know that. So unassumptive language is more like, hey, Preston, I was doing a little research on company X, and based on what I found, I think I might have met someone recently that could be an interesting fit. Here's why I think that. Would it be a bad idea for me to share their resume with you? I'm going to take you seriously because you are not essentially, first of all, you're talking to me like a human would, right? Which is another important element of copywriting. Write like you speak. So these are like a few kind of principles within just framing your message. And we're building a lot of this right into our AI to kind of help coach recruiters on how to do this stuff that 95% are not generally trained on how to do it. Stuff like that is crucial and makes a world of difference when it comes to the efficacy of your outreach.
The funny thing is, right, when people think of recruiters now, or like, I want to be a solo recruiter, I want to start my own agency being a recruiter, I want to learn the fundamentals of being what a recruiter is, they just think that recruiting is just recruiting, right? Just like talking to candidates. But then, like we talked about, a successful recruiter now has to be part copywriter, part BD, part sales, part growth marketer, right? Just time, finance, admin,
the hats you wear.
The hats you wear, so you can be like a solo recruiter, but like within that solo recruiter to be successful now in this landscape, you got to wear like 30 hats, and you got to learn very, very quickly or leverage on great technology or products like Talin, for instance, that can kind of help accelerate your learning, because if not, you'll just get beaten over and over and over again by others who
and that's the bet that we are making, is if I can leverage technology, especially artificial intelligence, to skip a few steps in learning all of these different hats, I can maybe focus on the few things that are really important for the human-centered part of the job, as opposed to like, are you really going to spend, it took me years to become a decent copywriter. It took me reading and studying thousands of pieces of content from some amazing copywriters. Recruiter doesn't have time to do that. They are not going to be able to make that investment. But if I've gone ahead and trained an AI model on my decade of copywriting for various businesses, I can give that to you and you trust it, and then eventually get the data to validate that this produces high quality output. You simply use that, and over time you also get to know, what really good kind of looks like. And in addition, me on my side, my job as the tech provider is to continuously update my models to feed you what works. So now you don't have to spend, because you could learn a skill like copywriting, but guess what? And you guys would know this in BD copywriting, what works today in a year might not work. So now you've got to invest that time to keep your ear to the ground and be a part of the communities to see what's happening, to see what works. That's a full-time job. How are you going to do that when you've got 29 other hats to wear? So my bet is if we can provide that to the recruiter, tech enabled, we're going to make their lives a lot easier, but more importantly, we're going to make it, the barrier to them running a great business is going to be a lot lower.
I think like for us recruiters, I agree with you, Julian. I don't think we're going anywhere. Like, I know I talk about this a lot with Ryan, but if you look at like a different but similar industry, like real estate agents, right? They're the middlemen, very similar to what external recruiters do, like between two different stakeholders and parties. They were freaking out when Redfin, Zillow, when all those guys started coming on, and then they started freaking out even more when these companies started releasing AI models and all that stuff. Like, real estate agents are going to be gone forever, and now they're stronger than ever, right? Because technology didn't replace them; it made them do their job better. And so I'm that believer of the latter, that the same thing's going to happen. And being a successful recruiter is not just like wearing 29 million different hats, right? It's also like learning how to do all these steps to be from A to Z really, really well. And a lot of these steps are huge time sinks. They're manual, take up way too much time. And so I think the best recruiters are ones that can really identify the right tools out there that can help us free up time. And even if it's like, even if we're talking minutes per day, but compounded over a week, month, year, it's significant time saving. It allows you to go 10 times faster, being able to really focus on the activities that like really ultimately would push their business or get cash in their pocket, right? Like closing deals, submitting, managing the relationship relationship with clients and stuff like that. So when people, I guess, are kind of listening to this and they're thinking about the future, like what excites you most about the future for Talin? Is there like a feature or function that you guys are thinking about, you're working on, that you can kind of give us and the audience a little teaser about?
Yeah, absolutely. There's several. I mean, honestly, the one that we just if we're talking about BD, the one that we just released about a week ago, so far, we've been getting like pretty rave reviews on it. Basically, what you can do is you have the ability to take a candidate's resume, import it directly into our Chrome extension. And if you are sitting over top of kind of LinkedIn Recruiter, say you're in like a project in Recruiter, we will automatically build out very structured and complex kind of Boolean strings to target the hiring manager of who our AI thinks would be the hiring manager of that candidate, to basically help you run an NPC campaign in like a couple of clicks.
To clarify with the audience, so basically an NPC, the most placeable candidate, right? You want to be able to like identify a candidate, use them as kind of like a marketing angle, include them in your message, hoping to get clients to respond. But what you're saying now is we can leverage your extension. You can basically find a resume of a candidate we really like, maybe in our database, and then it can reverse engineer like hiring managers and people and companies to go after. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then does it then continue the process? So like, do you then help with data enrichment, campaigning and firing off the campaigns?
Yep, the whole process. I can then say, hey, great, we've identified 82 likely hiring managers, right? Or that would be interested in this particular candidate. Import them all into Talin, get their work email, get their cell phone number, build out a multi-channel campaign to email, LinkedIn message, call them, what have you, in any structure you'd like. Press play. The thing just runs automatically in the background and automatically updates my CRM kind of as it goes with who's responding, imports all those contacts into my CRM, etc., kind of keeping me posted on what's happening there.
Wow, that's so cool. So are you able to like scrape real-time data on a daily basis? So instead of like 80 to 100, what about like, can it just scrape the new job postings and be like, hey, I want you to be able to like pull up real-time data of new job postings, fresh, hot ones that are connected to this NPC, and then send campaigns from? Or is that possibly something that maybe you can do in the future?
So we actually had a really interesting learning there, because that's what we were thinking, right? Was initially like, hey, do we just go scrape job postings? And that's how we find those hiring managers. What we found was that by the time a job gets posted, a lot of times it can be too late. And actually, we had a much higher success rate of simply matching company and hiring manager, regardless of job posting, to the candidate and reaching out to that complete list, which a lot of times, honestly, the difference in list size was, instead of, let's say there's 20 good hiring managers that have job postings, but maybe there's 80 or 90 really good hiring managers, maybe 70 of which don't have a job posting, but they could always be open to an interesting hire. They could have job postings coming up. They could have other roles that are open. Because again, I think your goal with that type of interview is not to get that candidate placed necessarily. Your goal is to start a conversation. And that's where I think a lot of people look at NPC wrong in some ways. They're just trying to get that person placed. Whereas our philosophy is like, your goal is to generate relationships or generate conversations.
That's
So
cool.
we got way better. Just, hey, match the candidate. And you're even seeing these huge AI companies that are doing this at scale. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Mercor or some of these companies that are basically building these massive AI engines that are taking in resumes of candidates and just pumping them out to companies basically and trying to match them using them. They're basically running NPC at scale from like a central like platform, creating a marketplace, if you will, that's just and they are the recruiting firm. So I'm seeing tons of data that shows like this works. It's like, forget the job posting. Everybody you reach out to, if they do have a job posting, they'll be in that list anyways. Just reach out to the full universe of good hiring managers that might be a fit.
Wow, that's super cool. So like, are you guys, what is the flow like? So can I approach you and be like, hey, Julian, my space isn't legal. And then you can be like, hey, this is my role. And then are you guys able to, or your database provides like NPCs for that? Or am I supposed to be, if I'm a user of Talin, am I supposed to find the NPC first? Does it start with me, or can you also like assist?
Yeah. So it kind of starts with you, right? So you basically, and you find like most recruiters that have been recruiting for a while are going to have what I call like a gold mine sitting in their ATS or database, which are these candidates who are top 1% candidates who maybe didn't get placed with them, or maybe they passed on a job that you were helping them to get into, but it's like you have a relationship with them. And a lot of times you can go to them and you can say, hey, would you mind if I anonymously sent your profile to some companies, and I can share with you who I'm going to send it to, or if it's cool with you, I'll just share it and I'll let you know who's interested, and it's up to you whether or not you want to meet them. And a lot of times candidates will say, especially if they're job seeking, are going to say, yeah, absolutely, please do that. And that's you take that resume and that's the start of your campaign. And Talin should automate building the list, getting the data, contact information, doing the outreach, and going from there. I've tested a lot when it comes to BD outreach, everything from, hitting up hiring managers managers with open job postings saying, hey, like saw you had this role, do you need any help on the role, to, reaching out to teams who have recently had a reduction in sales team force or something like that and saying, hey, are you looking to replace those members of the sales team? So far, I mean, nothing has worked as well as MPC has worked from the data that we've
I was
seen.
going to ask you, like, is MPC still an effective method for client acquisition in this landscape? So I guess the answer is yes.
Absolutely. Where most people go wrong with MPC, and this is like a rule that I teach, and I say not all MPCs are created equal. And this is a common thing with recruiters, and I try so hard to teach recruiters to not think this way, but they'll try a couple of campaigns, it doesn't work for them, and they stop trying. And I go, you would not last a day as a growth marketer, because you're at the tip of the iceberg. Like, when I say not all MPCs are created equal, it's basically like your job, and this is where you come in as the expert recruiter, this is where you have to know your market. It's like, hey, what is a really attractive talent profile right now that's really hard to find, that a lot of hiring managers in a given industry would be really eager to meet? And obviously, given the market, given our macroeconomic kind of where we're at, just in general, there's always going to be parts of the market that are hot, right? And so if, let's say, you work in tech, if you work in tech right now, it's fairly cool in a lot of industries. There's not a lot of VC dollars flying around right now. It's, I would say if you have a top 1% person in tech sales, that's really attractive, because someone who can sell in this down environment is going to be really attractive. Someone's going to pay for that person. If you have developers that have an AI background, super hot. So it's up to you to figure out what does the market want right now, and that's what you would deliver in terms of an MPC campaign. If you go put an MPC and that's an easy role to fill right now, or the market is filled with talent, why would I pay you money to help me go find that, when I can just put out a job posting and get 500 applicants tomorrow? And now with AI, they can sort through those applicants easier. So it's you gotta have some strategy going into it for it to be successful.
Do you guys also offer leads as well, or is it mainly just like a software that can help just free up the time sinks, leveraging technologies, pointing people in the right direction, right? Allowing them to save time.
Yeah.
What if someone's like, hey, in the legal space, this is my role, or finance, can we just lean on you for your technology to just give us leads?
Yeah. I mean, like, we're at the point now where, and we've been testing this out the last few weeks, we have some firms that have never run MPC before. We give them the fundamentals, we just give them our software, and we're like, just follow this playbook. And they're coming back to us saying, for the first time, we've gotten leads with cold outbound. We can't believe it. So is it a miracle cure? Obviously not, right? That's not going to be everybody's case. But I think for the first time, our tool is kind of in a place where it can handle every part of the flow, and it doesn't take a technical person to be able to run it, which is pretty exciting. We actually also have some partners who, on the service side that we work with, who can help. If you're like, hey, I just want someone to run this for us. We work with, I don't know if you're familiar with like Steven Perchikov, but we've done some work with Steven, who's done a ton of great like MPC work and stuff like that. So we'll occasionally, bring in Steven to help us work on a project. For brand and content, we work with Donnie Gupton, and we've got some great partners like that as well that we'll bring in too. So we've got a good community like that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And one thing I want to ask you is, what are your thoughts on like automating messages on LinkedIn? Because I know that can also just be very dangerous if you've done it incorrectly. I know LinkedIn is certainly making moves, especially recently, to make sure, right? Like, they're still the king. And if you scrape improperly, you automate improperly, it goes against their TOS, and they make it very, very clear that you're going against their TOS. So what are you doing to make sure like you're safeguarding that doesn't happen for clients? Are you maybe like recommending best practices, or just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it's just important to, kind of know the sandbox you're playing in, and just like not be, overly aggressive. I think if you take the approach of, hey, I'm not looking to scale things to a crazy amount, generally speaking, you're going to be completely fine. I think what LinkedIn's really after is spam, stopping people from sending out low quality messaging, things like that is what they're really after. So as long as you're not doing that, in my experience, your risk is quite low. Basically, don't automate, thousands upon thousands of messages, or send the same message out 1,000 times. You don't want to be doing that. You want to be doing very precise lists, high quality outreach, and make sure that you are not being spammy, basically.
Yeah. Don't be reckless out there.
Yeah.
And so if people are listening and, they're curious, they're intrigued about Talin, Julian, how does their pricing model work?
Yeah, absolutely. So we operate on a per user, per month basis. What's nice about us, we're one of the kind of few tools in our space that are a pretty complete solution that is not like on annual contracts. So you can have your team try it out, start with a couple users, onboard more later, even if you're a solo recruiter, just use it yourself, monthly. All of our plans are right on our website, and they range based on what you need from $99 to $199 a month kind of per user. And, the goal is that you're getting back a lot more than that in terms of hours freed up in your day to grow the parts of your business that you need to grow.
That's awesome. If someone's listening right now and they're also aspiring professional in tech, or maybe one day they too hope to kind of start a startup just like you, Julian, and follow in your footsteps, what is like one big advice that you want to share with them?
It's a great question. That's a tough one. It's like, is there one? You know what? I got to double down and I got to say, go work in a startup. I can't emphasize how crucial that was for me and my co-founder. Like both of us had that background and we have a lot of confidence in how we run our business, and we've done really well because of that. So there's a lot of cool early stage startups that are hiring. A lot of times, like, you can go to a 5-person, 10-person, 15-person company. And if you are in love when you get there, you'll probably be pretty happy as a founder too. So start there.
Well, you heard him, Julian, or I guess the audience. You heard it from the man himself. Go work at a startup, or maybe plan B, work in growth marketing, right? Or maybe
or both.
Or both.
Or do both.
There you go.
But honestly, I could just go on and on with you, and we talked a lot about a lot of great topics that personally fascinate me as well as Ryan. But I just want to thank you so much for your time, Julian, for also just sharing a little bit more about your brain, your thought process, and how you got to where you are now. And from working in BDR, SDR, to product, to digital growth marketing, to falling into the recruiting tech space out of all the spaces you could have fell into, right? And now tackling a problem that is very fundamental and just prevalent out there, specifically for a lot of recruiters. I think you guys can provide a great solution, and just also very personally excited to see what you guys are going to do in the future. So I would love to keep in touch. I would love to support and root for you guys to continue to grow and find success, and excited to see where things end up later this year and throughout the next couple of years.
I appreciate that very much and love the work that you guys are doing. It is so needed right now in the industry for recruiters to basically just level up, their ability to do good outreach, do good, grow their business, automate things, follow, do what they need to do to be successful in a pretty tough market right now. And yeah, you guys I've watched a bunch of the videos, looked at a bunch of the content. It's great stuff. Honored to get added to the repertoire. And yeah, thank you again for having me.
No worries. It's been our pleasure, and we'll see you around, Julian.
Thanks, guys.